Welcome back to This Week in Racing. The racing season is well and truly underway now that we're almost out of February and we can start looking towards March and the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg for IndyCar, as well as the 12 Hours of Sebring. Both events I will be covering on my channel, and thanks to the Patreon supporters down below, we're going to be going in a little bit more style. This is just only some of the things that I will be able to share with you over the next couple of weeks to help improve the coverage. This mic flag I think looks pretty cool, so I'm really happy how that turned out, and it'll just help the professionalism of the coverage going forward at the racetracks. So, what do we have to talk about this week? Well, obviously, the big story was Ryan Newman and his miraculous recovery. We'll talk about that. There's also a brand new Mercedes innovation in Formula One that has taken the internet by storm, and I just want to talk about that a little bit in this video, about how cool it is in 2020 to still see things in racing and race car technology that kind of defies convention and kind of blows people's mind. It's cool that that's still happening. We also got a ton of IndyCar silly season news, including a team that completely came out of left field, and I'm not even sure is totally legit. We'll have to see how things play out there. But there were a couple of other significant announcements on that front, and we're also going to talk about the hypercar regulations in the World Endurance Championship and the absolute dog and pony show that has become as hypercar and DPI convergence has happened. But it seems like it's certainly left the hypercar program in a wasteland. So let's get into it this week in racing. So obviously the top story, and after being so worried about Ryan Newman in his terrible crash at the end of the Daytona 500, fantastic news as there was a video posted by his wife, Chrissy Newman, over on Twitter that showed Ryan Newman walking away from the hospital after being treated for serious injuries, which is just amazing to see, to be honest with you. And certainly, I think there's going to be a lot of speculation about his driving career going forward. And as more and more details come out, that I'm sure situation will become more clear. Roush Fenway Racing said there's no timetable for his return, and I think I speak for a lot of people in saying that he should take all the time he needs. The important thing really for Ryan Newman, and again just the thing that just warms your heart, is seeing him being able to be with his daughters and spend time with them after such an incredible near-death experience. I think it's just wonderful news to see how well Ryan Newman is doing after that crash, and I think I speak for most people when I say that. Now, speaking of the number 6 in NASCAR, there is a driver named for Las Vegas this weekend, and it's Ross Chastain. And now, Ross Chastain, I think, has made a lot of a little. He's one of the drivers that I'm very high on in terms of NASCAR prospects. He just seems to always have a great attitude. He's a very fast driver, and he makes the most of opportunities. You look at the Daytona 500, he was making a move for the lead and potentially the win there with a couple laps to go. Had an accident that may or may not have been his fault, depending on who you ask. But he's an aggressive driver, and I think that's what NASCAR wants and needs when you start looking at this next generation coming up and drivers like Jimmy Johnson beginning to fall by the wayside. You're going to need some guys with some spunk, so to speak, and I think Ross Chastain, if he hasn't turned any heads already, is definitely going to turn some in the Roush Fenway number 6. Scott McLaughlin update. This was reported by several different outlets that talked to Dick Johnson, the Supercars owner or part owner with Roger Penske of Scott McLaughlin's car in that championship. He expects to lose McLaughlin to IndyCar next year. He's been very candid about that, or at least have him not be driving Supercars for him next year. I guess he didn't totally confirm the IndyCar thing, but Marshall Pruitt kind of led a little bit more credence to the IndyCar rumors that Scott McLaughlin will be there full-time in 2021, as reporting that Scott may run as many as 8 races. That's not a misspeak, folks. As many as 8 races in this year's IndyCar Championship. And since he passed his oval test at Texas Motor Speedway, you would have to imagine that some of those races are going to be oval tracks. I'll leave it up to you guys in the comments to speculate exactly which 8 races out of the IndyCar schedule Scott McLaughlin will take on. We already know one, and that's the IndyCar GP in May. Speaking of May, This is finally the Hinch watch is over. James Hinchcliffe announced that he will move to Andretti Autosport for a partial season schedule, taking car number 29, the car that I think many people, including Michael Andretti himself, had pegged to be the Fernando Alonso landing spot. But that didn't end up happening because of the Honda drama that I did a whole video on, so I don't have to talk about here. The sponsor, of course, we knew that already. It was Genesis, which is an Indianapolis-based company, or at least they have a base in Indianapolis. And James Hinchcliffe will do the IndyCar GP, so that grid continues to expand for that particular race. The Indianapolis 500 becoming the sixth Andretti car entered out of that stable, as well as seventh if you consider Jack Harvey there. And this was kind of a surprise, Texas Motor Speedway, which is another race which is kind of quietly starting to get up there in terms of car count. I know there's as well Dragon Speed is an additional entry there, and there's always a possibility of a Dreyer and Reinbold or somebody going into that race. So it looks like there's a lot of races this year for IndyCar that are going to have very high car counts, and I'm sure a lot of Canadian fans and just fans in general of IndyCar are very happy to see James Hinchcliffe back in the series. Even if it's a partial season ride, it's a partial season ride with a team that knows how to win. This was a certainly a very left field announcement, but there's a new team apparently going to enter the Indianapolis 500. It's called Citroën Buhl Autosport. Now, the Buhl is Robbie Buhl, who once qualified on the front row for the Indianapolis 500 in 2002, famous for driving the PureX car, and eventually was also a part owner in Dreyer and Reinbold Racing. Now, he no longer is a part of that team. This is a totally different operation. And the Citroën part of that ownership group are Robert and Nick. And the most interesting part, despite the fact that they are a part of a capital group, obviously a big money organization, I think for sports fans, they are the largest majority owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is, I think, very interesting to kind of find out, especially considering some of the current partnerships in racing with the Roush Fenway, as well as the Steinbrenners over with Andretti. Now, the press release read that it was pretty clearly going to be some sort of a team partnership. Now, I had originally speculated that it would be Dreyer and Reinbold, considering Robbie Buhl's previous connections with that team, but as Racer.com reported literally right before I was about to hit the record button on this video, they are not, that is not part of their plan, despite the fact that they will be entering two cars in this Indianapolis 500. So assuming that this team does not have a chassis, again, they're going to be partnering with another team. So who does that leave? Well, you look at maybe a Ray Hall, that's a possibility, but considering the Pittsburgh connection, and this is going to sound wild, especially if you've already watched my Indy 500 entry list prediction video, could this team potentially partner with former Pittsburgh-based, or at least Pittsburgh-based team owner, Chip Ganassi? Could Chip Ganassi enter a fourth car with Robbie Buhl? That would certainly be quite a turn of events, and one that I think would be even more left field than this current announcement already has been. Something super cool and super interesting and super innovative is the Mercedes DAS system, which is a steering wheel trick which is used to adjust the toe. Now, how that works is the driver will pull the steering wheel back towards them on the straightaway, which straightens out the toe in the suspension. They do this through the steering rack. So technically, on a technicality of the rules, this is totally legal because it's movement of the steering wheel rather than active movement of the suspension. Under braking, the driver will just push the steering wheel back forward, probably aided by G-forces, and the toe will go back to its original form to help with cornering. Now, the straightened out wheels is theoretically something to aid in getting the car as least resistant as possible, as least draggy as possible. So trying to maximize straight line speed. At least that's the theory. Of course, other people have a theory that this is just a complete waste of money or something that they're just testing, and the fact that it was discovered is a happy accident for Mercedes because it means that a lot of teams will be looking into this to possibly develop. Well then, again, the FIA banned it for 2021. And I just want to talk real quick about this sort of stuff because we should appreciate things like this. Because again, this is not something that happens very much anymore. We don't really see a lot of innovation in racing. I mean, so much of it is vanilla. There's so much spec racing out there that there's not a ton of innovative thinking, a lot of different thinking. And seeing something like this is so neat and so cool, especially when it's so easy as a casual fan or even someone like me who's clearly never going to be an engineer to appreciate and understand exactly what is happening visually. That is such a cool thing to look at. And something, again, racing has been lacking, and I think Formula One will end up lacking this unless I'm very much mistaken in the next couple of years with the cost cap coming. You're not going to see things like this anymore because their financials with the development of the race cars are going to be cut by so much. Now, again, I could be wrong. You could see totally crazy innovations going forward. But I just want to put that warning sign out that we should appreciate things like this, even if it ends up being that Mercedes dominates for a long time to come. And finally, the ACO's hypercar woes continue, as it was confirmed on Wednesday that Aston Martin has delayed its V12 Valkyrie hypercar program. This departure, along with the currently unconfirmed Peugeot backing out, will only leave Toyota and Scuderia Glickenhaus, the American company, privateer, left as the only two committed hypercar manufacturers at this time. And it seems like Peugeot and maybe some other manufacturers are looking at LMDH, which is the second coming of the Daytona Prototype International class, which will be allowed to race at 24 Hours of Le Mans starting in 2021. There's a lot of things to kind of digest there from a manufacturer standpoint. Now, that being said, it doesn't really seem like LMDH was really to blame here. More so that Daddy Stroll bought that majority share in Aston Martin, and that meant that Aston Martin's money is going to Formula One to sponsor what is essentially Force India. It's not Force India anymore. I understand it's Racing Point. The car's still pink. I'm still going to call it Force India. So this is something that is weird to me because I thought that hypercar convergence, or I guess the prototype convergence, was supposed to mean that we were going to get to see Toyota at Daytona and Cadillac at Le Mans. That doesn't seem to be the case right now. It seems that what has happened here, whether it was intended or not, is that the convergence has just meant the manufacturers have gone scurrying to the LMDH category, the IMSA category, because they're going to be able to race those cars anywhere without restrictions. There's a possibility that you'll only be able to run a hypercar at Le Mans in the World Endurance Championship. So I guess the question would be, well, what's the value in by building a bespoke chassis, a bespoke engine, like the rules suggest, a hybrid system, all that big technology, only to be BOP'd to cars that cost, what, a tenth, a third of what your car costs? That's a tough sell. That's a really tough sell because, again, you have, and this has probably been the problem of getting this done in the first place, was the totally different ideologies, the totally different goals behind World Endurance Championship prototype racing and IMSA prototype racing. The IMSA prototypes, the costs, while they're not super affordable, they are a lot more controlled than pretty much any other manufacturer-based series in the world. The FIA World Endurance Championship, at least as it stands right now, and obviously they're changing things with the hypercars, that is still a massive investment. I mean, the Toyota, it's a beautiful race car. It's an incredible race car. Can't wait to go see it at Sebring for a final time in the coming weeks. But the fact remains that car is, the development is, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into that over the last few years. It's just such an enormous amount of money to expect to get a chance to win at Le Mans. So even if they cut that budget by 80, 90%, get it down to 10 million, you're probably still spending more than you would buying an Orica chassis, putting some different body work on it, developing some body work that's going to be BOP'd anyway, so you don't really have to worry about whether it actually goes fast, and then putting an engine in it that meets your manufacturer requirements, whatever those may be. And everything's going to be BOP'd, similar to like GT3 racing. So to me, I don't see the appeal of hypercar anymore, and I think definitely the manufacturers have thought about that. So it's gonna be, and this is the other thing that's such a shame about the Lawrence Stroll Aston Martin thing, because it's not related to this at all. It's because it went from one vanity project, which was, we want a cool halo car that everybody can get behind, the Aston Martin Valkyrie. We're gonna bring the V12 back to Le Mans. It's gonna be awesome. And then it's like, oh well, the boss's son needs Formula One money, so we're going Formula One racing. Ooh. Yeah, if I was an Aston Martin customer, I would be buying a Ferrari next. I can tell you that. But it's just disappointing, because I think the Valkyrie was going to be an awesome race car. It was going to sound great, because I think, unfortunately, we're going to be stuck with a lot of droning V6s in LMDH or hypercar, period. So that's a shame. But that's modern racing, unfortunately. And Aston Martin gets to have a V6 instead of a V12. How are you feeling about that, Aston Martin fans? That's a lolcow. And we're getting regulations at Sebring, apparently, unless they delay those. So we're going to find out what exactly LMDH is going to be and how much it's going to cost going forward. So that should be fun. Stay tuned to this channel for coverage of that. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and this has been This Week in Racing. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next video.